Please close your eyes. I'd like for you to think about the images that pop into your mind when I first say the words human trafficking. Don't overthink it. I just want you to remember those first images. Okay, you can open them now. If the images that you flashed on were those of pretty young girls locked in a basement, maybe chained to a bed, dark figures holding them hostage, or vans transporting them from place to place, you'll be in the majority. Those are the images and the stories that we're inundated with, stoked by Hollywood, social media, and Law and Order SVU. But I can pretty much guarantee that no one flashed on an adult male construction worker, or an adult female cleaning a hotel room with the Rocky Mountains shining boldly in the background. On any given day in 2023, there are 24 million people being trafficked for sex or labor worldwide. 6 million of them, roughly the population of the state of Colorado, are being trafficked for sex. And about 18 million, 3 times that amount, are being trafficked for labor. Yet we rarely hear about it, and maybe more concerning, we almost never recognize it, even when it's happening right in front of us. I was 26 and just out of graduate school when I first heard about human trafficking. I was working on the outskirts of a conflict zone in northern Uganda with child soldiers. Talking to the families, hearing about the pain and the fear and the hunger and the violence, it was overwhelming. Learning about children being exploited hurts. I wanted to be part of the solution, but I wasn't sure how to create real, lasting, and sustainable change. Since moving back to the US, I've dedicated my professional career to working with marginalized and vulnerable communities on labor exploitation and sexual exploitation. Perhaps like many of you, I used to think of human trafficking as a faraway issue, one perpetrated by criminal syndicates moving people across borders, or scary dudes in a white van kidnapping people from Target parking lots. What I've learned over the last 10 years is that the social and systemic inequalities that underpin human trafficking are just as prevalent in the United States as anywhere else, and that trafficking happens everywhere, including in high-income ski resort communities like ours, where inequality and demand are high, and awareness of the issue remains persistently low. The complexities and the enormity of this issue make it a hard thing for us to wrap our brains around. People get hung up on the idea that it's too big, too scary, too far away, or maybe just not our problem. So the legal definition of human trafficking is a severe form of exploitation for labor, including sex as a form of labor, through force, fraud, or coercion. So a human is forcing another human being to work against their will through physical or violent force, fraudulent promises, or coercive tactics for their own profit. Profit is the key word. Trafficking is an economic crime. It's hard for us to think of it that way because it's also so violent, but at its core, trafficking is about profit. We often think that if we arrest the perpetrators and rescue the victims, that will solve the issue. But that logic is flawed. While law enforcement certainly has a role to play, we cannot arrest away an issue so inherently tied to what and who we value or don't value, what and who we find worthy of our time and our resources, and how we spend our own hard-earned money. Trafficking is not a criminal justice issue, it is a human rights issue. And no matter where in the world you live, it is at your doorstep. I'm going to tell you some stories now, some true stories of severe exploitation for labor or sex that occurred here in Colorado, told to us through the Human Trafficking Hotline. They're hard to hear, they're also hard to tell. Earlier this year, a group of Nicaraguan men were smuggled across the border by a man that they paid to guide them. Once they arrived in the US, their smuggler began to extort them for more money, telling them that if they didn't pay, their families would be killed. When they couldn't pay, because they didn't have any money, they were brought to Colorado, where their debt was sold to a local construction business owner. While working construction for this man, paying off an extorted debt, the men were forced by threats of deportation, physical violence to themselves and to their families, to build condos at a local ski resort, without pay and under torturous conditions. They were working 18 to 20-hour days, very little food or water, and they were forced to sleep outside in January, with temperatures dipping well below zero. No safety equipment, no training. They were too scared to talk to law enforcement, but when they were able to find an advocate to support them, they were quickly moved by their trafficker to the next site. Same conditions, no advocate. They are still in conditions of debt bondage. This is human trafficking. A few years ago, a 13-year-old girl named Kaya met a 35-year-old man online. She was a pretty typical kid. She was from a Midwest city. She lived with her single mother, who she often fought with. Mom worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, so she wasn't at home very much. After a few weeks of messaging with this man, she agreed to meet him at a local fast food restaurant. She was quickly charmed. He was good-looking, showered her with compliments and with gifts, things that her mother couldn't possibly afford. She thought she was in love. After a few weeks, he asked her to run away with him. They would drive his car to California, where they would get married and start a new life. She was in. A couple of days before they were supposed to leave, he asked if she had any friends that she might want to take along. He had a friend who needed a girlfriend. She was able to convince another 13-year-old girl to run away with them. That girl was already jealous of Kaya and her new boyfriend. It didn't take much convincing, and they were gone. After a couple days and a few hundred miles, the men pulled off the highway at a hotel. They told the girls that they were out of money and that they were a family now, and everyone was going to have to contribute. And they reminded the girls of how much they'd already done for them. Within a couple days, they built online profiles for the girls and began selling them for sex. They were stopping on the highway, hotels, motels, Airbnbs, sometimes just for a night, sometimes for multiple nights, depending on the demand. They arrived in Keystone, Colorado, at the peak of ski season. Tens of thousands of wealthy tourists to feed the demand. The demand was high. These 2 13-year-old girls were trapped inside this Airbnb for 3 weeks, kept high in order to stay compliant. This is human trafficking. In Colorado's wealthiest county, in a beautiful home, there was a dark secret. There lived a wealthy foreign national family. They owned multiple homes around the world. It was mom, dad, and their 2 school-age kids. They kept a nanny close by at all times. She was a distant cousin of the family, from the same country, but she didn't speak English. To outsiders, everything seemed in order. She would sometimes accompany the family to the grocery store or on other errands. People would occasionally see her playing with the kids in the yard. What they didn't know was that she was suffering. She'd been recruited to come to this job by a local labor recruiter in her hometown. Her family had encouraged her to take the job. She was young, and she'd been promised an opportunity to attend community college. This was her chance. When she arrived, her passport was confiscated for safekeeping. She was forced to sleep on blankets in the basement, no furniture. She was told she couldn't leave the house without permission, and she was beaten when she tried. And the father would regularly visit the basement to sexually assault her. She was working 15 to 18-hour days, caring for the children, the home, cooking. It took her 9 years to finally summon the courage to leave. 9 years. This is human trafficking. Okay, so this is heavy, right? Let's all take a deep breath together. Do this with me, okay? Ready? I get it. By now, things are probably coming up for you. They are for me too. These stories are overwhelming and devastating, and you're probably wondering how you fit into this complex puzzle. There are ways both big and small that we as community can support survivors. And I'm going to give you some tools now so that we can do better, because I do believe that we can do better. Once we're armed with the truth about how this shows up and who is most affected, and maybe most importantly, how we can work together as community to both prevent this from happening in our own backyard and also to support survivors to come forward and report it when it does. First, push back on false and often harmful narratives. Know the truth and bring people into this fight with the truth. We don't need sensationalized imagery. The truth is enough. Speak up on social media, or maybe even around your own dinner table, against invented narratives of innocent young female victims or scary male perpetrators that are kidnapping people. According to FBI data, less than 1% of trafficking involves kidnapping. Traffickers overwhelmingly know their victims. They are family members, like the case of the domestic servant, or intimate partners, like Kaya's boyfriend, or employers, like on the construction site, or other people in positions of power. On average, 25% of perpetrators are female. Trafficking is hidden in plain sight. Second, stop othering and don't look away. Trafficking is not something that happens over there or only to certain types of people, and the perpetrators are usually not who we think they are. Who and what we value and who we consider worthy of our time and our resources can have a huge effect on trafficking locally. By putting this into a more local context instead of a faraway issue, we can start to see how the vulnerable people in our own communities might be being exploited, and we'll better understand how to support them. I'll ask you to now think about the vulnerable people in your own community. Those who don't feel connected to resources or who don't know how to find them. Trafficking victims don't stay in these situations because they're locked in a basement. They stay because they don't know who or how to ask for help, don't think that they'll be believed, or simply have nowhere else to go. Third, we all want stuff and we want it cheap. The allure of cheap labor and goods is the driving force behind our consumer choices. Yet so often in our quest for affordability and convenience, we don't recognize the consequences of our buying habits. In industries like agriculture, hospitality, construction, domestic servitude, cost-cutting measures have taken priority over basic human rights. Employers capitalize on a workforce lacking legal protections and often composed of migrants just seeking a chance at survival. Workers suffer deplorable conditions, substandard wages, and limited rights. I urge you to become more conscious consumers. Think deeply about where your food and manufactured goods come from. Fourth, call the human trafficking hotline. Report suspicious behavior or find resources for a friend, a family member, or a community member in need. If you see something, say something. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. I hope I've given you some clarity on what trafficking looks like in our communities, and I really hope that you're thinking about the vulnerable people in your own community. Hold on to that. Turn towards this issue instead of away from it. Affecting change locally will have ripple effects globally. I could add more here, but I'm gonna let the great poet and author Maya Angelou have the last words. She said, "I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better." Thank you.